Hello. So if you guys are watching this video, it means that you've made it to the very end of the course. And at this stage, you've already seen all the main sections of an article. But I would be remiss if I didn't cover the kind of other, I was going to say peripheral, but they're not peripheral, genres that are involved in the academic writing for publication process. And in this sequence of videos that you're going to see for this module, we cover a few of the most important ones that include cover letters, how to reply to reviewers. And in this one here, we're talking about an issue that many of you have heard a billion times before, but it's important to talk about because it is a part of the publication process that can confuse authors, and that is the issue of plagiarism. So briefly, we're going to be talking about what it is, what it isn't, which is also important, and why it matters in the manuscript submission process. And what is plagiarism? Well, a lot of people have this concept that plagiarism is is basically simply lifting text from an article, for example, putting it into your own article and not citing the source or pretending that's your own. And that is one kind of plagiarism, but there's more to it than that. Many of you have already used the system Turnitin, maybe even since high school. Others are familiar with other software like it, and Turnitin is a plagiarism detection software, and this kind of their white paper on plagiarism is kind of dated now, but I think it hasn't changed much. Kind of gives you an overview of the kind of different types of plagiarism that exist. So they break it down from everything from the clone, that is basically taking someone else's body of work, that whole piece of writing, and just putting your name on the byline as if it's your own. There's the Control C, which is when you take some parts of the text and not source it and not cite the source and just mix it in with your own. A find and replace is when you think you're clever and you mix it up a little bit and change one verb, instead of walk, saunter, or trot or waddle or something like that, and making it so that there are a bunch of synonyms, for example, but not changing the actual, still stealing someone else's ideas and phrases, basically. There's the remix, what they call, which is the act of paraphrasing and making content fit together seamlessly. So that's basically as if you're sampling from music and just thinking that. And again, I mean, I'm speaking to evil intentions here. One thinking that one is clever and just simply taking a bit from here, a bit from there, and then putting it into one's paper that one submits and saying it's their own. The recycle, which is the act of borrowing generously from one's own previous work without citation to self-plagiarize, and we'll be talking about that. Mind you, all of these, some of them are more or less common in writing for publication, because once you start writing for publication, it's assumed that you're wanting to make a contribution to your field, to your discipline. And whereas a lot of these are kind of meant, these ones that you're seeing with the different types of plagiarism, they're really kind of mechanisms that one might use if they don't feel like they have something to say, and so they just kind of lazily hope other people can say it for them. Then you have other things like what they call the hybrid, which is combining perfectly cited sources with copied passages without citation in one paper, the mashup, The 404 error, a written piece that includes citations to non-existent, so just lying basically about a source. Aggregator includes proper citation but with no original work. And the retweet paper includes proper citation but relies too closely on the text's original wording or so. So all of these are kind of basically the same thing, which is when you take someone else's words or someone else's ideas or someone else's ideas and pass them off as your own through a number of ways of not citing or not indicating that you're talking about someone else's work. One definition from the Collins-Cobill Dictionary basically says that plagiarism is the practice of using or copying someone else's idea or work and pretending that you thought of it or created it. And so what is implicit in that definition, that there's an intentionality of malice, this kind of pretending. Some people may plagiarize and not realize it. And so I'm going to speak more to the latter, which is people who don't want to plagiarize. Anyone watching this video, I'm sure, has no intention to plagiarize, but maybe you are afraid of it and you don't know how to avoid it. And also in that avoidance, you may actually be depriving yourself of very interesting ways of building an argument. And so I want to kind of disentangle that, what is plagiarism and what it is not. And a good example that kind of can get this conversation started for us happened in 2008 when rather happened in 2016 when there was a controversy that arose from a 2008 speech delivered by Michelle Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, and then First Lady Melania Trump. And I don't know exactly how it happened that people noticed that many of the words that Melania was using were very similar to wording used by Michelle Obama. And so this was made a big deal of in many of the legacy media networks. And here you see a comparison that was highlighted by CNN, where the 2008 Democratic National Convention speech, you see Michelle Obama saying, "And Barack and I were raised with so many of the same values, that you work hard for what you want in life, that your word is your bond, and you do what you say you're going to do." And then Melania's speech, again, this is 2016 at the Republican National Convention, was, "From a young age, my parents impressed on me the values that you work hard for what you want in life, that your word is your bond, and you do what you say, and you keep your promise." And so, I mean, even on a very superficial level, not only is the theme very similar, but you see that the words "work hard for what you want in life" and that your word is your bond is kind of too much, too similar to be just chalked up to pure chance. And so that in itself would constitute plagiarism. But even the idea more broadly, it would also be considered plagiarism, especially since at no point here does Melania Trump give credit to the person who came up with this. Here you have a further comparison. And what you see shaded here, I mean, if you want, you can pause the video and look at this. Is just too much overlap to be coincidental. You have, going back to the white paper, you have simple Control-C's here, parts of the text interwoven into one's own text. But even though these stretches of speech are inserted into, mind you, without credit, in Melania's speech, the whole general thrust of the text is basically lifted from Michelle Obama's speech. And so there's kind of find and replace that went on to change a few words here and there, but essentially it's kind of pretty much an egregious example of plagiarism if you were looking at it from an academic perspective. And so even though, for example, in this gray shaded area, the words are different. So you have Michelle saying, and Barack and I set out to build lives guided by these values and pass them on to the next generation. And the words are different in Melania's speech, where she says, and we need to pass those lessons on to the many generations to follow. This idea is expressed with different words, but the ideas are the same. So when it comes to plagiarism, if many people ask me as a writing instructor, okay, well, I don't want to plagiarize. How do I take sources? I like to compare them to raw ingredients and mix them into my work without raising the suspicion that I'm plagiarizing other people's work. And I like to continue on this metaphor and say, well, you know, I'm somebody, I like to cook. Obviously, when I cook, I have to use raw ingredients. And so, you know, what you have here in this photograph in front of you is maybe what could typically go into spaghetti sauce. Or you have your tomatoes and you got your onions and your garlic and your mushrooms or whatever, however you prefer to make your sauce. People will make their own sauce in many different ways. Some will use onions, others don't. Some will use carrots or whatever it may be. But the point is that the ingredients are the same, and how you mix them together is your own sauce, including the quantities that you use, whether you choose to use salt or not, or whatever it may be. You're taking raw ingredients that are out there for everybody to use, and then you're making it your own sauce. And so let's continue this metaphor of your paper, your own ideas being your own particular brand of sauce. And with that in mind, then, this here has all those raw ingredients in, but you've made it your own. The academic sense of this is that this is your voice coming out. That flavor in the sauce is your voice. We've talked about authorial voice, and so you cannot help but mix in those ideas. If these are not only sources, but they're also ideas, you can't help but mix in those ideas because you're part of that conversation. You're part of that academic conversation. So you're taking those voices, those other people's voices and ideas, because they are other people's ideas. You're not the first one who's thought of everything, but you're mixing it into your own sauce. That's your own voice. So how do we do that? And how can you how can you make the best use of those things without risking plagiarism? So I'm going to walk you through an example from my own experience. So here is a paper that I believe you've seen before in this course, published a few years back. And just like any other paper I've written, I source different voices. And so the people who you see here in blue, those are the onions, those are the garlic, those are the tomatoes, etc. And I'm being very careful here, as you'll see in a minute, to make sure that my voice is heard, as we've talked about with authorial voice, but also to make sure that it's clear when I'm speaking and when it comes from somebody else. So there is this overlap and interplay between authorial voice and avoiding plagiarism, or I should say, using those sources so that you are making the best of them to build to convey what you want to say, to make your point, without plagiarizing. So all this talk about plagiarism is a little bit dangerous in the sense that people get so scared of plagiarism that they can drown out their own authorial voice. And so here you see in this the very first sentence, among a spectrum of other common contributing factors such as faulty statistics, Bordage 2001, poor study design, Pearson 2012, and lack of knowledge of the literature, Belcher 2007. So in that previous paragraph I was talking about, all of the reasons why people are rejected, who have their articles rejected beyond language, which is something we've talked about a lot in this course. But each of those they have their own studies, but I'm sampling from them to say this is what I know about the area. This is my voice. This is my own assertion. But I'm making sure that I'm also mentioning the people who contributed to this assertion that I'm making. That's the tomatoes. Here is the garlic, and here is the onions. To take a closer look at this notion, in the following paragraph, I talk about how language alone is somewhat of a red herring. So in the discussion of academic voice and authorial voice, we talked about how people often make an I say, and then in that I say, I can include what they say. That is just simply to back up my point, or what I've referred to before in this course as making a claim. This is the claim, and then the rest of this is warranting. And so that is really important part of argument building, and then it's an important part of making your own authorial voice come through. And I want to draw your attention to this word here, red herring, because as you're going to see shortly, it sticks out. This is a kind of red herring, is sort of idiom, which means it's not that common actually, but it fit really well here in this particular paragraph, which is a red herring is when there is a confounding factor in an argument, for example, when in fact there are more important issues that one should be paying attention to. And so in this very first sentence, on the other hand, there is evidence that language alone may be somewhat of a red herring when it comes to manuscript rejection. Basically, that means that language alone is a distraction. It's not the real thing one should be looking at. And so that's my claim, and then I warrant that claim. I provide evidence for that. That comes from the literature. This is me cooking up the spaghetti sauce. All right. A logical fallacy that leads towards a false conclusion. Now I'm highlighting this because it comes up here in this discussion of plagiarism. So I'm in that spaghetti sauce. I'm inserting this key ingredient. We'll call the red herring the key ingredient, which would be kind of disgusting to put in a tomato sauce, I admit. But let's keep that in mind. And when I'm cooking up that spaghetti, that red herring, this is my red herring sauce, and I'm using Gosden's voice, and I'm using, and I'm also problematizing and discussing. So even though I'm reporting Gosden, I'm also I'm kind of adding my own voice there with these adverbial clauses here, though he also reports that what is perceived as poor language may ultimately tip to scale. So I'm interpreting, I'm not just reporting, I'm adding, I'm adding, I'm further elaborating. So this is all my voice coming through. I'm using all those tomatoes, I'm using all those onions, I'm using all that garlic and salt and pepper and whatever, but it's my voice coming through. There I am cooking up my sauce. And what you see here is the red here is my red herring ingredient. This is me cooking up red herring sauce, meaning I'm talking about all the things that make language a red herring according to all of these ingredients. Everything you see there in green is my own voice. And then the parts in blue is basically saying what they found, and all of that together uh, it makes up my sauce. Where the green, rather where the blue here, according to Gosden, reporting that, Flowerdew found that, concluded that, all of those reporting verbs are basically me referring to the original ingredients, the original tomatoes, original raw ingredients. And then the other stuff, the green, for example, me saying indeed, blah, 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 me saying similarly, blah, 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 is me mixing those things together. It's adding my own flavor to that red herring sauce. All right. So reporting and paraphrasing is a key part of argument building. It's a really key part of when you report the literature, but the paraphrasing part is obviously the part that overlaps with the discussion of authorial voice, and which is why one should be clear about what plagiarism is, because this is an important part of academic writing. You shouldn't try to avoid using sources at all. You should know how to use them to make your own sauce. So my red herring sauce is my own, right? Even though I've used other ingredients to cook it up. However, this article that has been looked at and cited by others drew on other people's voices, and I want to draw attention to one particular weaving in of somebody else's words in so a direct quote, but look how it happens. Arguably, I say right here, a more useful perspective might be that of English as a lingua franca, ELF, since ELF provides for the notion that, and so I start with, all of this here is me starting with a claim. And I finish that claim with a kind of warrant, which is English is being shaped at least as much by its non-native speakers as by its native speakers. It's a claim, but the claim is strengthened by the fact that I've directly included someone else's voice in that claim, which is Seidelhofer. It's a strategic inclusion because Barbara Seidelhofer is a really important voice in this area of English as a lingua franca. And so I know that voice will enhance my sauce. It's going to give that extra punch to that claim that I'm making. All right, so I continue with my voice and I say, in such a light, what were previously seen as deviations from native English research article discourse might instead be seen as contributing to the ongoing development of the language used in the RA genre. So I'm continuing with my voice here, adding my own voice here, and I continue with another claim, basically. All of this here. And so the rest of this, what follows that sentence there, after what follows that claim, is another warrant, another evidence for that claim. This time bringing in Maranen, and another important voice in English as lingua franca, and says, Maranen et al. State plainly that writing for academic publishing in English is in effect now writing in English as a lingua franca. Then I interrupt the quote and I add in my own voice, again, potentially giving rise to a language form that arises out of cross-cultural collaborations, thus adapting in lexis and structure. That last sentence that begins with Maran et al. 2016. It's me bringing in that study, that chapter from a book, to add an important voice to my sauce, a key ingredient that will make that sauce extra strong. But the original ingredient was not exactly how I wanted. I had to slice it up, basically. I had to chop up those onions or whatever, those tomatoes, to make it exactly how I wanted them to fit into my sauce. So that meant me taking one piece of the discourse and slicing it. Actually, I think it was 2 different pages, and weaving it all together. I didn't change, I did not alter anything in terms of what the authors were saying in the original text, but I had to weave them together using my own voice in order to make that point. All right, this is important, as you'll see in a minute. That I took original text, I use a direct quote, but I mix in my voice. I should also add parenthetically here that using other people's, using a lot of direct quotes is not something that I recommend a lot. And I know that especially if you're an inexperienced author and or a non-native speaker of English, one tends to want to use other people's voices a lot in the text because you know that it's already published and this was a good way to say it. I think that if you do it, try to do it the way I've done it here, which is when you're clearly kind of mixing in to your discourse because it very conveniently adds to the argument that you're building, and that it kind of makes a point exactly how you want to make it, as a kind of really extra strong way to put it all together, like I've done here. This kind of adds a nice little cap onto the point I'm making. That came from this book here, the Routledge Handbook of English for Academic Purposes, this chapter here. Okay, so this is me reading that chapter, okay, taking you to the backstage of how that quote wound up in the final article. And I found this okay, writing for academic publishing in English is in effect now writing in English as lingua franca. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you have seen quotes like this before. You think, aha, this is exactly what I want to say, and this person is saying it. So this person here is saying exactly what I want to say. It's not just me. However, what you see that follows, what this implies is that we are facing a language form that arises out of cross-cultural collaborations, and as is wont of language, it adapts. And Lexis, there's stuff in there that it doesn't really fit into my sauce. It didn't fit into my red herring sauce. It didn't fit into the sauce that I was cooking up. But that part there fits perfectly. So this was the original. Writing for academic publishing in English is in effect now writing in English as a lingua franca. What this implies is that we are facing a language form that arises out of cross-cultural collaborations, and as is wont of language, it adapts in lexis and structure to the circumstances it is used in. What I wrote was, I cite the authors and then state plainly, so my own voice there, state plainly that writing for academic publishing in English is in effect now writing in English as a lingua franca, potentially giving rise to a language form that arises out of cross-cultural collaborations, thus adapting in lexis and structure. So I took this out. That last sentence there came out. I took out the writing for English as lingua franca, and I took out this here because what this implies, that statement there, in the original, is that author's voice. And this is also, what I'm crossing out right now, is also the original author's voice. And so I took those out. So, okay, well, I have my own flavor, my own voice, my own sauce that I'm cooking up. This other part here, though, is perfect, fits right into what I'm cooking up. And so there, since I cite the authors, I'm using it to support a point that I am making, my own red herring sauce and all of that. Since I'm using it to make my a point that I'm making in my own sauce, it's just an ingredient that I'm adding. And moreover, I cite the authors, and I further make it my own by slicing it up and putting it in the correct in just the right amounts that I want to add flavor to my writing. So this here in the original I took, but I also took that and that. The rest does not fit into what I want to say, and it's clear who is saying what. So me saying these are the authors saying that, state plainly, is my own voice, that part in blue. Then the next part there, potentially giving rise to, is my own voice, and then thus adapting is my own voice. So here you can easily see where the quote is, where it came from, and where my own voice is. And moreover, from the very beginning, when all of this started in the text, it was also clear why I was using it and that it was coming from my own voice. So that's me making my own tomato sauce. All right. Now, funnily enough, I received an invitation to review a manuscript not too long after that article was published. And a lot of times this will happen once you start republishing articles where you get requests to review because you have been one of the authors that have been cited. And so these authors cited me in their references. And so they decided to invite me to review. And here what you're seeing is the manuscript. And I read this with great interest because clearly it was along the same lines of what I had written, and it's clearly something that, since it's about English as lingua franca and academic writing. But there was something that really caught my attention, and I don't know if you can already see it right there, which was the same quote that I had chosen. Suddenly it caught my eye. This person had identified the same quote that I had noticed. And mind you, the fact that this quote was there wouldn't be totally extraordinary, except that I also know that this chapter was from an edited volume that is not a common book. It's not something you can just download from the internet. This chapter you'd have to pay a lot of money to get it. And sure, one might have library access to it, but it's just not one of these. It's not something you would find very easily, for example, in a Google Scholar search. So that in itself kind of caught my eye, like, wow, this person identified the same quote. However, there was something else about that quote that caught my attention. And I don't know if you can see it right away. That suddenly it occurred to me that this person was using my sauce. The sauce that I had cooked up using those special ingredients was being used. And so immediately I could see that this person had not actually read the original text as I had done, but simply had just lifted, inappropriately appropriated my own weaving of that quote into my text. Because here is my original here. as you recall. And this is from the manuscript I received. So, in fact, aside from this part here, they lifted the entire thing, even the page number and everything, without quoting, which would be fine, I suppose, if you're taking someone else's sauce, which, I mean, really the analogy would be as if you went to a supermarket, bought a ready-made sauce, and then put that into your own sauce. That's basically what the person's done here. Except in the academic world, you'd actually have to say that's where that sauce is coming from. In any case, it would be a bit odd. But there it is. And so they took my sauce that I made, and then this manuscript that came from China. They made this marinara sauce that actually wasn't that sauce. It was actually my sauce. And so if you ran this through a plagiarism software, this here, it would come up as belonging to another text. And so that's what happened, in fact. There is a system that now is being used at the time of this recording by many journals internationally called Crossref, which is powered by Authenticate, as you see here. And it's very powerful software that is sensitive to plagiarism, and it knows all the tricks in the book, all those mashup, Control-C's, and all that I showed you at the beginning of this video with the Turnitin white paper. They're able to detect all of those. This is what an Authenticate report looks like. And so you can see that there are various degrees of sensitivity and plagiarism detection. And essentially, if a journal detects plagiarism, especially if it's kind of a really strong suspicion of plagiarism, they simply just will not proceed in the manuscript process because it's too risky for the journal. And this goes in all the countries that you're watching this video in. It doesn't matter if it's a local journal. Many journals now, whether they be international or local, from inside Brazil or inside China, it doesn't matter. They're using anti-plagiarism software. And what you see is that this is from a journal, and as just an example, should plagiarism be detected in any paper submitted to this journal, the manuscript will be filed, and the authors will not be allowed to submit another paper to the review period for at least 5 years. So this is a local journal, in this case in South America, but they take this very seriously. That's actually a common practice these days, is that once you get your name tarnished like that, then they simply will not proceed any further with you as an author. There's also self-plagiarism, so-called self-plagiarism, and a lot of people are confused about what that is and how to get around it, because obviously if you write a doctoral dissertation, it might be published somewhere on a database, and so what if you use that? Well, here's a question that was asked on a blog recently. It says, "Hi, I am thinking about revising my doctoral dissertation into a journal article to have a broader readership, but I am concerned about any potential problems of self-plagiarism. My doctoral dissertation was electronically published by the university in 2014. In that case, can I still submit an article, the content of which is based on most parts of my doctoral dissertation? Would there be any problems of publication ethics?" And the short answer is you can and you should publish from your doctoral dissertation, but there are ways to do it. So here the answer is: converting a thesis or dissertation into one or more journal articles is an acceptable practice. Most journals will not have any issues with this as long as You mention this in your cover letter and cite the source in your manuscript. However, the plagiarism checking software used by the journal will detect a high percentage of similar content if you directly copy paste from the dissertation. Some journals might have a problem with this. Therefore, it is advisable to paraphrase or rewrite the content. Additionally, a thesis and a journal article are two completely different subgenres of academic writing. Each caters to a different audience that sets different expectations. Therefore, it is best to take the ideas and rewrite the content using the style and format of a journal submission. I have really nothing else to add to that except I concur completely that, as I've said a few times, more than a few times in this course, that it's better to rewrite that story because of all the issues that I've talked about before, where if you don't reconceptualize a lot of the content, there'll be things that you may insert that the relevant of which will not be clear, or you may forget to explain some things. If you try to squeeze all your chapters into one article, it just doesn't work. But beyond that, just being completely transparent, as you'll see in another video about in your cover letter, that what you're submitting, the manuscript that you're submitting, comes from a dissertation or a thesis, will help them if what you submit comes up as being similar to something that's already online, then they can look and say, okay, yeah, well, this was a dissertation, and so that's okay. What you don't want to happen, and this is why journals are so concerned about this, one of the reasons, is retraction because of plagiarism. Here you have, I've taken the authors out of this because obviously I don't want to shame anybody, but this is an example of many, many that happen every year. This article that was originally titled "Highly Active Antiretroviral Therapy Induce Adverse Drug Reactions," okay? And here you have now this preceded by the statement from the journal, retracted by plagiarism. And this has to stay up there because it was published by the journal, unfortunately. And you can just imagine that publishing an article that has been plagiarized really just undermines your credibility as a journal. And journals can ill afford that, especially when and it's a real shame if you're talking about potentially important therapies that can come out in medicine, for example, and if people don't give credence to what's being published in a journal, that actually can have long-term detrimental effects. And but that's all of that is not to mention the tarnishing of one's reputation, because I've omitted the names of the out of respect for the authors in this particular example here, but their names are still on this retraction, and they may forever stay there, and it's obviously not something that you want to have associated with your publication record, and so you do have to take care. And so the message here is be careful, but also I hope that this video has served to point out how using sources is an important part of the writing for academic publication process. You shouldn't avoid citing sources. Just know how to do so strategically, as I've pointed out.